The emergency sirens were getting closer. I stood at my back door, watching dozens of people flailing helplessly in my pool, their screams echoing across the neighborhood. Karen was in the center of it all, her designer swimsuit now a slippery mess, her authority dissolving as quickly as her dignity. "What did you do?" she shrieked, struggling to grab the pool edge only to slip back into the gel-covered water. "This is assault. This is criminal." I watched her thrash around like a fish out of water, except she was very much in water. Water that I had legally treated with Eel Deterrent gel just 3 days earlier. The same pool she had declared community property, without my permission. The same backyard she had invaded with her unauthorized HOA inspection party. As the paramedics rushed past me toward the chaos, I could not help but smile. Sometimes karma needs a little help. Sometimes it needs a lot of very slippery help. My name is David, and I used to live in paradise. Well, what I thought was paradise until she moved in next door. Willowbrook Estates was the kind of neighborhood where children rode bikes on sidewalks and neighbors waved from perfectly manicured lawns. I had spent 5 years turning my backyard into a personal oasis. The crown jewel was my pool, a beautiful kidney-shaped sanctuary surrounded by flowering gardens and comfortable outdoor furniture. Every morning, I would drink my coffee on the back patio, watching the sunrise reflect off the crystal-clear water. It was my meditation, my escape from the corporate world. The pool represented everything I had worked for, everything I had earned through years of 60-hour work weeks and careful saving. Then Karen Richardson moved into the house next door. I should have known trouble was coming when the moving truck arrived with a woman barking orders at the movers like a drill sergeant. Karen was in her mid-50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of clothes that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager." She carried herself like royalty inspecting peasant lands. Within a week, she had introduced herself as the newest member of the Willowbrook Estates HOA board. Not just a member, mind you, but the compliance and standards coordinator. A title that apparently gave her unlimited authority to make everyone else's life miserable. The first complaint came on a Tuesday morning. I found a formal letter in my mailbox, typed on official HOA letterhead. My fence, according to Karen, was 3 inches too high in the back corner. Never mind that the same fence had been approved by the HOA 5 years earlier. Never mind that it was the exact same height as every other fence in the neighborhood. "The regulations are very clear," Karen explained when I knocked on her door. She stood in her doorway like a gatekeeper, holding a thick binder of HOA rules. All fences must be exactly 6 feet high. No exceptions. I measured the fence again. 6 feet exactly. When I told her this, she insisted on measuring it herself, bringing her own tape measure and a clipboard. She measured the same section 4 times, each time finding a different measurement that somehow always violated the rules. The garden decorations were next. My small collection of tasteful solar lights along the walkway suddenly became unapproved illumination devices. The bird bath that had been there since I moved in was now an unauthorized water feature. Even my outdoor furniture was somehow violating some obscure regulation about visual continuity. But it was when she targeted my pool that I knew this was personal. Community standards require all recreational water features to be maintained according to specific guidelines, she announced during her third uninvited visit to my backyard. She stood at my fence, taking photographs of my pool area with a digital camera. "What guidelines?" I asked, genuinely confused. "The ones I am developing for the HOA board," she replied with a smug smile. We cannot have pool areas that create visual pollution for the community. Visual pollution. My beautiful, well-maintained pool that had never bothered anyone was now visual pollution. That evening, I spoke with my neighbor Mrs. Chen, who had lived in Willowbrook for 20 years. Her voice dropped to a whisper when I mentioned Karen's name. She destroyed the Hendersons, Mrs. Chen said, glancing nervously toward Karen's house. Fined them into bankruptcy over their mailbox color. The elderly couple on Maple Street had to sell their home because of her violations. She does not stop until she gets what she wants. What does she want? I asked. Mrs. Chen shook her head sadly. Control, power. She wants to own this entire neighborhood. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that my peaceful suburban paradise had become a battlefield. Karen had declared war on me, and I had no idea how to fight back. But I was about to learn. The harassment campaign began in earnest the following week. Every morning brought a new horror in my mailbox, each violation notice more ridiculous than the last. Monday, pool fence height noncompliance, second notice. Tuesday, unauthorized decorative lighting, immediate removal required. Wednesday, lawn furniture positioning violations, 72-hour correction period. Thursday, water feature maintenance schedule noncompliance. Friday, general property appearance degradation, comprehensive review pending. 5 letters in 5 days, each one typed on official HOA letterhead, each one signed by Karen Richardson in her capacity as compliance and standards coordinator. The fines started at $50 per violation and increased exponentially with each subsequent notice. I spent my weekend researching HOA bylaws, diving deep into the legal documents that governed our community. What I discovered made my blood boil. Most of Karen's violations were completely fabricated. The regulations she cited either did not exist or were being grossly misinterpreted. The fence height regulation, for example, actually allowed for minor variations due to ground slope. The lighting restrictions only applied to commercial-grade fixtures, not residential solar lights. The pool maintenance schedule she kept referencing was nowhere to be found in any official document. But Karen was not just making up rules. She was documenting everything with the precision of a crime scene investigator. I would return from work to find her in my backyard, measuring my pool deck with a tape measure, photographing my outdoor furniture from different angles, even collecting samples of my pool water in small containers. "Excuse me," I called out one evening, finding her crouched next to my pool filter. "What are you doing on my property?" She looked up without the slightest hint of embarrassment. "Conducting a compliance inspection. As a board member, I have the right to inspect any property for violations." "I never gave you permission to enter my backyard." "Permission is not required for official HOA business," she replied, continuing to take photographs. "If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the board." The next day, I called the HOA board president, Margaret Phillips, a reasonable woman who had lived in Willowbrook for 15 years. Her voice was tired when she answered the phone. "David, I am sorry about this situation," she said. "Karen has been very enthusiastic about her new position." Enthusiastic. She is trespassing on my property and making up violations. I understand your frustration, but Karen has convinced the other board members that your property has serious compliance issues. She has photographs, measurements, documentation. The board feels we need to take her concerns seriously. My heart sank. Karen had not just been harassing me. She had been building a case, manipulating the other board members with her fabricated evidence. While I had been trying to reason with her, she had been orchestrating a systematic campaign to destroy me. The stress began affecting every aspect of my life. I could not enjoy my morning coffee without wondering what new violation Karen would discover. I could not relax by my pool without feeling like I was being watched. My own backyard had become enemy territory. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. I arrived home from work to find Karen in my backyard again, this time with two other people I did not recognize. They were measuring my pool deck, taking photographs and making notes on clipboards. "What is this?" I demanded, walking through my back gate. "Official HOA inspection," Karen announced without looking up. "These are independent contractors hired to assess compliance violations. You cannot bring strangers onto my property without permission." "Actually, we can," said one of the contractors, a thin man with glasses. "HOA regulations grant board members access to all properties for compliance purposes." I stood there, watching three strangers inspect my private property like it was a crime scene. The violation of privacy was complete. Karen had not just invaded my space, she had brought witnesses to validate her lies. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the growing stack of violation notices. 17 letters in 3 weeks, over $2,000 in fines. My peaceful suburban paradise had become a bureaucratic nightmare. But as I sat there, surrounded by Karen's harassment campaign, something changed inside me. The fear and frustration began to transform into something else, something colder, something more focused. Karen Richardson wanted to play games with my property. She wanted to treat my backyard like her personal domain. She wanted to destroy my peace and steal my sanctuary. Fine, let her try. But she had no idea what she was walking into. The strange incidents began 3 weeks into Karen's harassment campaign. Small things at first, easy to dismiss as coincidence or equipment malfunction. My pool skimmer would be found floating upside down in the morning, even though I had positioned it correctly the night before. The pool vacuum hose would be disconnected from the filtration system, coiled neatly on the deck like someone had been examining it. Most disturbing, my pool water began developing an unusual cloudy appearance that no amount of chemical treatment could correct. I suspected Karen was behind these incidents, but I needed proof. The thought of her creeping around my backyard at night, tampering with my property, made my skin crawl. So I made a decision that would change everything. I installed security cameras. The system was simple but effective. 4 wireless cameras with night vision, positioned to cover every angle of my backyard. The feed recorded directly to my phone, with motion alerts for any activity. The first night nothing happened. The second night the same. But on the third night at 2:47 a.m. my phone buzzed with a motion alert. The footage was crystal clear. Karen Richardson, wearing dark clothing and carrying a small bag, had climbed over my fence and was walking directly toward my pool. She spent 20 minutes examining my pool equipment, taking photographs with her phone, and collecting water samples in small containers. I watched in stunned silence as she disconnected my pool vacuum, examined the filtration system, and even tested the water temperature with a digital thermometer. This was not casual trespassing. This was systematic investigation. The next morning, I had documentation of criminal trespassing, but I also had a bigger problem. My pool water had developed a strange algae bloom that turned the crystal clear water into a murky green mess. Despite following all the proper chemical treatment protocols, the algae kept returning. I called AquaClear Pool Services, the company that had originally installed my pool system. The technician, a knowledgeable man named Marcus, arrived that afternoon to assess the situation. "This is unusual," Marcus said, testing the water chemistry. "The algae bloom is not responding to standard treatment. You might need a specialized approach." "What kind of specialized approach?" Marcus pulled out his tablet and showed me recent environmental regulations. The county has implemented new guidelines for pool maintenance in areas with sensitive ecological systems. Apparently, runoff from residential pools has been affecting local waterways. He explained that several pools in the area had been required to use eco-friendly Eel Deterrent gel as part of their regular maintenance routine. The gel prevented eels and other aquatic creatures from entering pool systems, which had become a growing environmental concern. "Eel deterrent gel?" I asked. "Completely safe for humans," Marcus assured me. "It is basically a biodegradable polymer that creates a slippery surface underwater. Eels cannot grip it, so they avoid treated areas. But the gel also helps with certain types of algae control. The treatment would cost $200 and would need to be applied directly to the pool water. The gel would be invisible and odorless, but it would create a uniquely slippery texture for anything trying to gain traction in the water." "How slippery?" I asked. Marcus chuckled. "Slippery enough that you will want to be extra careful getting in and out of the pool. The gel makes everything extremely slick when wet, but it is perfectly safe, just challenging for balance." I authorized the treatment immediately. As Marcus worked, mixing the Eel Deterrent gel into my pool water, I watched through my kitchen window. Karen was in her backyard, pretending to tend her garden while clearly monitoring the pool maintenance activity. The gel treatment was completed by late afternoon. My pool looked exactly the same as before, crystal clear and inviting. But now it contained an invisible surprise that would make movement in the water nearly impossible. That evening I checked my security cameras. Karen had returned at 1:15 a.m., once again climbing over my fence to investigate my pool. But this time, she seemed frustrated. She spent 40 minutes examining the water, taking photographs and collecting samples, clearly trying to figure out what had changed. She had no idea that she was gathering evidence of her own future humiliation. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for Karen to walk into it. The final escalation came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was drinking my coffee on the back patio when Karen appeared at my fence, carrying her usual clipboard and wearing the smug expression of someone who believed they had won. "David," she called out, not waiting for permission to speak, "I have some important news about your property." I walked over to the fence, dreading whatever new violation she had invented. But what she said next was beyond anything I could have imagined. "The HOA board has determined that your pool area violates several community standards," she announced, reading from her clipboard. "Specifically, Regulation 473 regarding community water features during summer months." "Community water features?" I asked, confused. "This is my private pool." Karen's smile was pure malice. "According to the updated HOA guidelines, any residential pool larger than 500 square feet becomes a community resource during peak summer months. Your pool is 750 square feet, which makes it subject to shared usage requirements." I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. "Are you telling me my pool is community property?" "During designated community access periods, yes. The board has reviewed your case extensively, and we have determined that your pool must be made available for HOA member use." The audacity was breathtaking. Karen was not just harassing me anymore. She was attempting to steal my property through bureaucratic manipulation. "Show me this regulation," I demanded. Karen flipped through her clipboard and handed me a photocopied document. It was typed on official HOA letterhead, complete with section numbers and legal language. But I had studied our HOA bylaws extensively, and I knew this regulation did not exist. "This is completely fabricated," I told her. "Take it up with the board," Karen replied. "In fact, the board will be conducting an official inspection of the community pool area this Saturday. We will be hosting a pool party to demonstrate proper community usage." My blood ran cold. "You cannot host a pool party in my backyard." "We are not hosting it in your backyard," Karen corrected with a cruel smile. "We are hosting it at the community pool that happens to be located on your property. Big difference." She handed me another document, this one an official notice signed by 3 board members. The language was formal and intimidating, threatening massive fines and legal action if I interfered with the community access inspection. "Failure to comply with community pool access requirements will result in fines of $500 per day," Karen read aloud, "plus legal fees and potential forced sale of property to satisfy HOA liens." I realized that Karen had been planning this for weeks. Every violation notice, every trespassing incident, every piece of fabricated evidence had been building toward this moment. She had manipulated the other board members, created fake regulations, and turned my neighbors against me. "How many people are you inviting to this pool party?" I asked, my voice barely controlled. 37 HOA members and their families," Karen replied. "The board felt it was important to demonstrate that the community pool is accessible to all residents." 37 people, in my backyard, using my pool, treating my property like a public park. I spent the rest of the week trying to contact other board members, hoping to find someone reasonable who would stop this madness. But Karen had done her work well. Margaret Phillips, the board president, was out of town. The other board members either did not return my calls or cited Karen's extensive documentation as justification for the inspection. "She has photographs, measurements, legal precedents," one board member told me. "The evidence is overwhelming that your pool violates multiple community standards." Evidence, all of it fabricated, all of it designed to justify this invasion of my privacy. By Friday evening, I had exhausted all legal options. The pool party was scheduled for Saturday at 2:00 p.m. Karen had even posted flyers around the neighborhood, inviting families to enjoy the community pool facility. But as I sat in my backyard that evening, watching the sunset reflect off my gel-treated pool water, I felt something I had not experienced in weeks: peace. Karen Richardson thought she had won. She thought she had broken me, stolen my property, and humiliated me in front of the entire neighborhood. She had no idea that she had just orchestrated the most spectacular downfall in HOA history. The Eel Deterrent gel was still active, invisible beneath the surface, waiting for unwary swimmers. Tomorrow, Karen would lead 37 people into my backyard, declaring victory over my private property. And then she would discover exactly what happens when you try to swim in a pool designed to repel eels. Saturday afternoon arrived with perfect pool weather. The sun was shining, the temperature was in the low 80s, and there was not a cloud in the sky. It was the kind of day that made pool ownership worthwhile, which made what was about to happen even more twisted. I positioned myself at my kitchen window, watching as cars began arriving at 1:45 p.m. Karen had organized this invasion with military precision. Families with children, elderly couples, teenagers with pool floats. They parked along the street and walked directly into my backyard like they owned the place. Karen stood at my back gate, greeting everyone like a hostess at her own party. She wore a designer swimsuit covered by a flowing cover-up and carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she had achieved total victory. "Welcome to our community pool facility," she announced to each arriving family. "Please make yourselves comfortable. The pool is maintained to the highest standards for everyone's enjoyment." Our community pool. My blood boiled as I watched her give tour of my own backyard, pointing out features I had installed and landscaping I had maintained. She had brought folding chairs, coolers, and even a small speaker system for background music. By 2:15 p.m., 37 people had transformed my private sanctuary into a public circus. Children ran around my pool deck, teenagers tested the water temperature, and adults set up camp chairs in my carefully maintained garden areas. Karen positioned herself at the shallow end of the pool, clearly preparing for her grand entrance. She had planned this moment for weeks, the symbolic claiming of my property in front of the entire neighborhood. "Everyone gather around," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "Before we begin enjoying our community pool, I want to say a few words about proper community property usage." The crowd gathered around her, some looking uncomfortable with the situation, but most appearing to accept Karen's authority. She stood at the pool's edge, gesturing toward the water like a politician at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. "This pool represents everything our community stands for," she continued. "Shared resources, common standards, and the understanding that no one person should monopolize facilities that could benefit everyone." I watched from my window as Karen built toward her moment of triumph. She had humiliated me, stolen my property, and gathered an audience to witness my defeat. The pool stretched out behind her, crystal clear and inviting, hiding its slippery secret beneath the surface. "Now," Karen announced, dropping her cover-up dramatically, "let us show everyone how to properly use community pool facilities." She stepped toward the pool edge, arms raised like a conquering hero. The crowd applauded politely as she prepared to enter the water. This was her moment, her victory lap, her public claim to ownership of my property. Karen stepped into the shallow end confidently, expecting the normal resistance of pool water against her body. Instead, she immediately slipped sideways, her foot sliding uncontrollably on the gel-coated pool bottom. "Whoa!" she exclaimed, windmilling her arms as she tried to maintain balance. But the Eel Deterrent gel made traction impossible. Her other foot slipped forward, and she crashed backward into the water with a tremendous splash. The crowd gasped as Karen thrashed in the shallow end, unable to gain any footing on the slippery pool bottom. Every attempt to stand up resulted in another fall, her arms and legs sliding helplessly as she struggled to find purchase. "The pool is slippery," she shouted, panic creeping into her voice. "Something is wrong with the water." But her warning came too late. Several teenagers had already jumped into the deep end, expecting normal pool conditions. They hit the water and immediately began struggling, unable to swim effectively through the gel-treated environment. "I cannot move normally," one teenager called out, his usual swimming strokes ineffective against the slippery resistance. "My feet keep sliding," shouted another, trying unsuccessfully to touch the bottom. More people entered the pool, and the chaos multiplied exponentially. The Eel Deterrent gel made every movement unpredictable and uncontrollable. Bodies that expected to float found themselves slipping and sliding in impossible directions. Karen remained in the shallow end, crawling on her hands and knees toward the pool edge, but even that proved impossible. The gel coating made the pool sides as slippery as the bottom, providing no grip for escape. "Help me," she screamed, her designer swimsuit now soaked and twisted, her perfectly styled hair plastered to her head. "I cannot get out." Adults rushed to assist, but anyone who entered the water immediately joined the chaos. The pool had become a slippery trap, beautiful and clear but impossible to navigate with any dignity. "Call 911, someone shouted from the pool deck. "People are having trouble getting out." I watched from my window as Karen's moment of triumph transformed into complete humiliation. She who had sought to control my property now could not even control her own body. The pool she had claimed as community property had rejected her claim in the most spectacular way possible. The Eel Deterrent gel was working exactly as designed, making the pool uninhabitable for unwanted invaders. Karen had walked into my trap with absolute confidence, bringing witnesses to her own destruction. Justice had never been so slippery. The emergency sirens arrived within 10 minutes, but by then the pool had become a scene of absolute chaos. Paramedics rushed toward the water, where 17 people were struggling to exit the gel-treated pool with any semblance of dignity. Karen was still in the shallow end, now sitting in 2 feet of water, her legs splayed out like a toddler who had never learned to walk. Every attempt to stand resulted in another dramatic fall, her arms windmilling helplessly as she crashed back into the slippery embrace of the Eel Deterrent gel. "This is assault," she shrieked at me as I walked calmly onto my back patio. "You did something to this pool. This is criminal. I am calling the police." I stood there, watching the emergency responders work to safely extract people from my pool, and I felt nothing but calm satisfaction. Karen's designer swimsuit was twisted around her body, her makeup was running in dark streaks down her face, and her authority had dissolved as completely as her dignity. "Ma'am, we need you to stay calm," one paramedic told Karen as he waded into the shallow end wearing special traction boots. "We are going to help you get out safely." "I want him arrested," Karen pointed at me with a shaking finger. "He booby-trapped this pool. This is attempted murder." A police officer approached me, his notepad ready. "Sir, we need to understand what happened here. Multiple people are claiming the pool has been tampered with." I handed him a folder I had prepared for exactly this moment. "Officer, my pool was treated with Eel Deterrent gel 3 days ago as part of a required environmental compliance program. Here is the documentation from AquaClear Pool Services." The officer reviewed the paperwork, which clearly showed the legitimate treatment date, the environmental regulations requiring the gel application, and the safety warnings about increased slipperiness. "This treatment was legally required?" he asked. "Yes, sir. The county environmental department mandated Eel Deterrent gel for all residential pools in areas with sensitive waterways. The gel is completely safe for humans, but it does create a slippery surface underwater." At that moment, Marcus from AquaClear Pool Services arrived, having been contacted by the emergency dispatcher. He carried additional documentation and testing equipment. "This pool was treated with standard Eel Deterrent gel on Wednesday," Marcus confirmed to the officer. "The treatment is required by County Regulation 4738 for ecological protection. The gel is FDA approved and environmentally safe." Karen's face went pale as she realized the implications. But you did not warn anyone. Warn anyone about what? I asked calmly. This is my private pool on my private property. I had no idea you were planning an unauthorized pool party. The police officer looked at Karen, who was still sitting in the shallow end, her legs spread wide for stability. Ma'am, did you have permission to use this pool? It is a community pool, Karen protested. The HOA board designated it as shared community property. Sir, the officer asked me, did you give permission for this gathering? Absolutely not. I received a notice claiming some fabricated HOA regulation, but I never consented to anyone using my pool. This is all private property. Marcus was testing the pool water, confirming the presence and concentration of the Eel Deterrent gel. The application is within normal parameters, he announced. The gel concentration is exactly what we recommended for environmental compliance. One by one, the other board members were extracted from the pool, each looking embarrassed and confused. Margaret Phillips, the board president, had returned from her trip to find her neighborhood in chaos. Karen, she called out from the pool deck, what is this about community pool regulations? I never approved any such policy. But you signed the inspection notice, Karen stammered. I signed a routine property inspection form. You told me it was about fence height violations. The truth was unraveling as quickly as Karen's composure. The other board members began comparing notes, realizing that Karen had misrepresented the inspection as routine maintenance issues rather than a property seizure. She told me it was about landscaping violations, said board member Tom Harrison, wringing gel from his swim trunks. She said it was a safety inspection, added board member Linda Chen, looking mortified. Karen's fabricated regulations, her manipulated board votes, her entire campaign of lies was collapsing in front of 37 witnesses. The woman who had spent weeks documenting my supposed violations had been caught in a web of her own deception. Officer, I said quietly, I would like to file charges for criminal trespassing. I have security camera footage of Ms. Richardson entering my property without permission on multiple occasions. Karen's scream of protest was cut short as she tried to stand up and immediately fell backward into the gel-treated water with another tremendous splash. The tables had turned, and they were just as slippery as my pool. The legal consequences began immediately. Within a week, Karen Richardson faced criminal charges for trespassing, harassment, and abuse of authority. The security camera footage provided irrefutable evidence of her repeated illegal entries onto my property. But the criminal charges were only the beginning. The HOA board called an emergency meeting 3 days after the pool party disaster. Margaret Phillips, mortified by Karen's manipulation, led the investigation into her conduct as compliance and standards coordinator. We have discovered that none of the regulations Karen cited actually exist, Margaret announced to the packed community room. She fabricated HOA bylaws, misrepresented board decisions, and used her position to conduct a personal vendetta. The board voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position and revoke her HOA membership privileges. Every violation notice she had issued was declared invalid, and all fines were immediately canceled. Furthermore, Margaret continued, the board will be issuing a formal apology to David and compensating him for the unauthorized use of his property. The compensation was substantial. The board paid for professional pool cleaning to remove the Eel Deterrent gel, landscape restoration to repair damage from the pool party, and legal fees I had incurred defending myself against Karen's harassment. But the real vindication came from my neighbors. Once Karen's lies were exposed, other residents began coming forward with their own stories of her harassment and fabricated violations. The Hendersons, whom Mrs. Chen had mentioned, received formal apologies and financial compensation for the bogus mailbox violations that had nearly bankrupted them. The elderly couple on Maple Street was contacted by the board and offered assistance in returning to their home. 7 different families had been victimized by Karen's abuse of power. My stand against her had protected the entire community from future harassment. Karen's property went up for sale within 2 weeks. The legal bills, combined with her complete social isolation, made her position in Willowbrook untenable. No one would speak to her, no one would associate with her, and everyone knew her as the woman who had tried to steal a neighbor's pool. The for sale sign appeared in her yard on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, she had moved out, her belongings packed into the same moving truck that had brought her to our neighborhood 6 months earlier. I watched from my back patio as Karen loaded her final boxes, her face grim with defeat. She glanced toward my house once, catching sight of me enjoying my morning coffee by my pool. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something I had never seen before in her expression: acknowledgement. She knew she had lost. She knew she had brought this on herself. She knew that her greed and cruelty had led to her own destruction. The HOA board implemented new policies to prevent future abuse of power. Board members could no longer conduct solo property inspections. All regulations had to be approved by majority vote, and homeowners were given clear appeal processes for any violations. My pool, once treated with Eel Deterrent gel, was returned to normal crystal-clear perfection. But I kept Marcus's contact information, just in case I ever needed to make the water slippery again. The lawsuit Karen threatened never materialized. Her lawyers advised her that attempting to sue over a legally required environmental treatment applied to private property she had entered without permission was a losing proposition. Life in Willowbrook returned to the peaceful suburban paradise I had originally sought. Children once again rode bikes on sidewalks, neighbors waved from perfectly manicured lawns, and I could enjoy my morning coffee without fear of harassment. Sometimes, late at night, I still check my security cameras. Old habits die hard, but now I am watching to protect my neighbors from the next Karen, not defending myself from the current one. The lesson is simple. Bullies like Karen count on their victims being too intimidated to fight back. They abuse their power because they believe no one will stop them. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to let them slip into their own trap.